Hi, I'm Dan from Stooker Specialty Coffee, and today we're going to look at how to improve making espresso at home. So think of making coffee like cooking. With cooking, you could have the best ingredients in the world, but unless you know how to put them together correctly, you'll never find the perfect balance of flavor. And it's the same with coffee. So we need to use a recipe. A coffee recipe is based on the dose, the yield, and the extraction time. They're the three main parameters we want to look at today. So the dose is the amount of ground coffee you use. So the amount of ground coffee you put in the basket of the portafilter. Now, to do this correctly, we need to use some scales. So I'm using some scales at 0.1 of a gram. So if I put the portafilter on here and press tare, then I can weigh the coffee out. So in this instant, for this particular coffee, I'm going to use a dose of 19 grams. Pop that on here, 19.6, take a little bit out. Okay, excellent. So now I have my dose, 19 grams. So the next step is the tamping. We need to, first of all, distribute the coffee so it's nice and level. And then we need to do a quite simple tamp. The most important thing with the tamp is to make sure that this is completely level. We don't want it wonky. So, rest on the side, little prep, push down nice and steady. Don't overcomplicate this. Okay, parameter number 2 is the yield. So the yield is the amount of espresso in the cup. So the amount of liquid coffee produced. Now again, for this, to do it accurately, it's best to use some scales. So I've got a small set of scales here that I will put on the coffee machine. So I'm just going to turn those on, like so. Pop the cup on the top, and again press tare, so it zeroes the weight of the cup. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to engage the portafilter, and I'm going to press go. So all I'm doing now is I'm looking at the scales and weighing that yield, weighing the amount of coffee coming out. And for this particular coffee, I want to use 45 grams of espresso. So I'm just watching it as it comes out. And there we have our 45 grams. Now, I know that I've got the correct dose and the correct yield because I've weighed them. Think of the dose and the yield like a ratio. It's about having the right amount of coffee in to get the right amount of coffee out. And if you've got the right ratio, you've got the correct body and, in theory, the correct development of flavor. So, parameter number 3, the extraction time. So the extraction time is how long it took to produce the yield, how long it took to produce that espresso. And in this instant, it was 25 seconds, which for me, this is a little bit fast. So I'm looking for a time for this particular coffee between 27 and 32 seconds. Bearing in mind, the coffee that I'm using is a single origin Brazil. It's called the Capricornio from Stooker. And this recipe of 19 grams in, 45 grams out, and an extraction time of 27 to 32 seconds works perfectly to really lift and bring out those chocolatey, nutty flavors in the coffee. So going back to our third parameter, the time. Now this came out at 25 seconds, so it came out a bit too quick. What controls the extraction time is your grinder. How fine or coarse you are on the grind. So think of grind texture like sand and rocks. So think of your fine grind like sand and your coarse grind like rocks. Let's just imagine that you had a bucket of sand. If you poured water on that, it would filter through very, very slow. And that's what happens if you go fine on the grind. If you had a bucket of rocks and you poured the same amount of water on, it would fall through much quicker because there's bigger gaps and less resistance. So think of coarse grind like rocks. Now, at 25 seconds, this was a little bit too much like rocks. So I need to go finer on the grind, make it a little bit more like sand to slow that down. Now, on the grinder here, we have what's called the collar. And if you adjust the collar, you can adjust the grind texture. So if you go anti-clockwise, this way, it will go finer. If you go clockwise, this way, it will go coarser. So I want to go a little bit finer, so I'll go this way. Now, just remember, if you change the grind on a grinder, you always need to grind a little bit out because there's a little bit of retention. So on this grinder, because it's a bit more of a commercial grinder, I need to grind out at least 2 double shots. But on your home grinder, it's probably going to be a lot less. Okay, so now I'm just going to repeat that process and hopefully have a slightly longer elongated extraction time. So let's go again. Keep everything nice and clean as you go. Tear the portafilter. Weigh out your dose, your 19 grams. Perfect. We need to distribute and tamp, nice and level. Tear the weight of the cup on the scales. And now again, I can start my timer. So again, I'm just looking at the scales. I'm weighing out my 45 grams. And as we can see here, it is coming out noticeably slower, which is exactly what I wanted to happen. Okay, fantastic. So I've hit my 27 seconds, which is perfect. So now, essentially, I'm what's called dialed in. So I've got my ratio. I've got my ratio of 19 in, 45 out, and I've hit my target time of 27 to 34 seconds. Now, if you're working to a recipe when you're brewing espresso, you'll be finding much more balance in the flavors of the coffee. Put simply, if your coffee's coming out too fast, it's most likely to taste sour. If it's coming out too slow, it's most likely to taste bitter. So hopefully that should help and improve your coffee drinking espresso experience at home.